it's like a trick question, but your name is pronounced the way that I would assume it's pronounced. David Connerley Nahm, is that correct?
Well,
Oh,
I say Nam.
Nam. Well, I apologize for missaying your name the entire time.
Well, no, now so I don't consider it a mispronunciation because to me the difference between Nam and Nam is obviously how anyone who can read would say it, and I think it's just the natural variation. You all are from New Jersey, correct?
That's
And
true.
I'm from Kentucky, so I think there's probably a lot of words we pronounce slightly differently,
I
and
feel
I'm
like
probably
adding that H in
wrong.
there really makes it wanna be Nom, and then you're like, nah, nope.
It does, and I used to correct people when I was younger, and I stopped because I realized A, who cares,
Mhm.
and B, I'm probably not really right, um,
I mean, it's
and
your
but
name.
that's
You
just
are
how we say
right.
it. I mean, that's
Yeah.
just how I grew up. I mean, I'm a hick, right? And so I grew up saying Nam, and probably you're hearing my voice after many years of having my accent mocked, and it probably
Mm.
still sounds like I have an accent to you, but this is the very toned down version. So it's when I was a child, it probably had 3 or 4 syllables too. So
Have you spent your whole life in Kentucky, or did you go elsewhere for college or anything like that?
well, so I didn't go elsewhere for college. I went to college in my hometown, but after graduating, I did. Well, I moved to Louisville for 2 years, which of course is in Kentucky, so that doesn't answer your question.
Hmm.
But then we moved to North Carolina for a fair amount of time, and then to Virginia for about 15 or 16 years, and I've moved back to North Carolina. So I currently live in North Carolina.
Got you.
I think the New Jersey interpretation of that accent is like all the same. Like I don't know, like I don't know that I'd be able to tell immediately what the difference between a Kentucky, a North Carolina, a Virginia accent were.
I mean, obviously, there's a lot of different subtleties. I'm sure down here, in just the same way as you probably can more easily tell the difference between, say, a North Jersey accent or a South
Hmm.
Jersey accent, or someone from New York or someone from upstate New York, in a way that might sound more uniform to me. I'm sure maybe when you watch a New Jersey centered television show like The Sopranos, maybe every now and then you think that one's not correct. In the same way that whenever I see something set in Kentucky, I think that's not correct.
Well, so we're contractually obligated to mention Justified in every episode that we're talking about with Kentucky. When you watch, have you seen Justified?
I think I saw one episode
And you were
of
like,
it.
this is not a Kentucky accent, I'm out.
No, and I don't usually care that much. If you really want to know what it sounds like to be in Kentucky, go and just watch some old Ernest commercials, pre Ernest Goes to Camp, Jim Varney
Oh.
Ernest commercials.
He's a Kentucky guy?
He's from Kentucky,
All
and
right.
the character of Ernest P. Worrell from all those Ernest movies, I find to be a very accurate reflection of
That's
of
good insight.
All right. Well, yeah, it is. And it's like it's funny because I would think of that character as being like a broad caricature of something, you know?
I mean, people in Kentucky are broad caricatures.
Well, so he started like as just like local commercial guy and then just became nationally popular, right?
I think so. Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
the commercials were first, and he went. I think he went to the University of Kentucky. He was a theater major. I think did a lot of Shakespeare. I mean, he was a trained actor,
Yeah.
and did these commercials. And back in the '80s, I mean, they were obviously popular in the '80s when I was a kid, and there were several sort of like VHS tapes of other things of his non-Ernest based characters that you could
Hmm.
get. Like there was one that was like a science fiction movie, Doctor Otto and the Gloom Beam or something like that. All these kind of like weird, crazy videos, and we watched them all the time because we thought they were hilarious.
No, that's very cool.
I have a lot of affection for Jim Varney. Anyway,
He's great. He's wonderful.
Yeah. I love him the way that I love, Mr. Bean or whatever. Like
Yeah.
just from when I was a kid, that stuff really stuck with me.
Dorf?
Not so much Dorf, no.
My grandfather loved Dorf on Golf. We watched Dorf on Golf like every time we visited him, and then like looking back, I'm like, ooh, that never would have flown today. But
Yeah,
you know,
that's
yeah,
probably true of. I mean, I'm 48, and so that's probably true of literally everything I enjoyed in
yeah.
childhood. So I try not to look back too much.
Well, thank you for joining us. I don't remember if I mentioned this in the message when I reached out to you, but so in between like longer seasons. So okay, let me take a step further back to over explain this even more. There's musical artist Sufjan Stevens. You know Sufjan?
Yes.
10 or 15 years ago, was like, I'm going to write an album about every state. And then he did 2 and he bailed. And
Yeah.
so Bob came up with lists of books for every state in the country. And so this is the 3rd state we're doing. And we just draw them out of a deck of cards where you randomly pick one. So we did Louisiana, we did Delaware, and now we're in Kentucky. It's interesting to me, and I think also to him, but I won't speak for him, just like seeing like the sort of the regional differences, and like this season's 3 books long, but both this book and The Vine That Ate the South, which is our last book by J.D. Wilkes, both seem to be like ghost story, regional myth kind of things. And I'm wondering, like, as we talked about this before, like both of us are big fans of the X-Files, and seeing like sort of regional, like not just like Bigfoot or Loch Ness or whatever, but just like this is like the kind of ghost story that only kind of could haunt a small town you might not be familiar with. Like, I'm wondering if that was the type of thing that you grew up interested in, or if they're like where, if that at all was something that like inspired us, or kind of like where that like ghost story, supernatural, regional kind of whatever element came from.
From a very early age, I was, and I think this is true of most kids, or a lot of kids, to most kids somewhere in there, loved anything ghost story, legend, urban legend related. And so when I was a kid, my entire childhood, there was a whole series of books written by an author named Daniel Cohen that were sort of kids nonfiction books that were about ghost stories or true real monsters, that sort of thing. And so when I just loved it, that was all that I cared about. And from as long back really as I can remember, I loved going to the library, checking those books out just repeatedly, checking out sort of various Time Life style volumes of Mysteries of the Unknown. Literally anything that's like Mysteries of the Unknown, I would check it out. That just was my favorite thing. If we went out of town anywhere and there was a bookstore, I wanted to go to the bookstore so I could look and see if there was a new Daniel Cohen book. I just loved it. I just thought that was fascinating. And I think, again, that's not unique to me. That's, I think, how a lot of kids feel. I did not grow up, even though I grew up in Kentucky, and I grew up in sort of central rural Kentucky, I didn't necessarily have the childhood that one might imagine, where I grew up in a mysterious place with lots of folk tales and legends about the things. I grew up in a very boring small town. And to a degree, I loved those books and those stories because they made my really boring life interesting, because there was always the chance that there might be something interesting or mysterious out there, rather than the extremely dull and tedious life that I saw.
Sure.
Now, of course, there were plenty of your really standard, like our element. A lot of the things that are in the book are drawn directly from my life, even though it is not in any way autobiographical at all. But a lot of the sort of color flavor in the book is directly from my own childhood. And so the town in the book, Crow Station, that was the original name of the town that I grew up in, Danville, Kentucky. The street names, I didn't even bother to change them. The elementary school is the elementary school I went to. One of my, and so I mentioned I went to college in my hometown, and one of my college professors that I remained friends with, she mentioned that her son read the book and sort of had this moment of like, wait, this is literally my school. Like, yeah, that's right. That's cool. And so the sort of when I grew up, our elementary school had a haunted bathroom, right? I mean, and I'm sure that everybody's bathroom was haunted when they were in elementary school. I'm sure every elementary school bathroom is haunted, but we had those kind of mysteries, and there were, a couple haunted houses in town and that sort of thing. But it was by and large a sort of, my interest in those things was because I came from a place that was very much not mysterious.
And then what you wound up doing is you created a ghost story for your town, kind of.
Like, yeah, that's I wanted to sort of both pay tribute to those things that I did enjoy, that because even if there's not a mystery, things when you're a kid seem mysterious. There's always like that one house, right?
Mm-hmm.
That maybe no one has ever said anything about, but it just looks different. It sits a little bit further back, or it's got a garden that has a wall around it. It was like, well, that's kind of mysterious. Or why don't we use the third floor of the school, right? I mean,
Right.
that's how our school was. The third floor wasn't really used because it was originally the only school, and they built other ones later and stopped using the third floor of the old rickety school that I was in. And those things all seem mysterious when you're a kid. And so, I didn't have the childhood of like a grandmother telling me that there were things in the forest or anything like that. It was more we didn't have the X-Files when I was growing up, but we had whatever sort of the 1980s equivalent of that
Sure.
was. I loved, and so I just worked that into the book.
I think we do this with any place that's like far away from us. We tend to look at those places as being mysterious and strange, especially like if you come from an urban area, then you think of a rural area as having like this great deal of mystery and like, there's something around every corner, or like that's where the Mothman is, or that's where like whenever I was a kid, and I think this feeds into what you're saying, like I always like was obsessed with unsolved mysteries, right? And like I'd always watch that. I'd watch A Current Affair. I'd watch America's Most Wanted, and all of those stories all seem to take place really far away in these places like Kentucky. So Kentucky to me is like a land of magic and mystery, because all of these things that I saw on TV seem to be, if not Kentucky, like Kentucky is like a stand-in for any of these different places. But, that's because like you, I lived in, a suburb that nothing ever happened in. We had like, we had to make myths out of the house that hadn't mowed their lawn in a while. So it was like,
yes, yeah.
And now you've become that man.
Now I'm that man who hasn't mowed the lawn.
What is going on in that house? Why is he not mowing his lawn?
Yeah.
He's just reading books.
Mysteries of the HOA.
Yeah. Oh, don't get us started on HOAs. We got a friend who's obsessed with those. One thing we talked about a lot in the episode, and I think that is maybe top of mind for a lot of people who read the book, is the structure of it is very like dreamlike, in sort of like inching forward slowly in current day, and then like spending a lot of time going back and like exploring Leah's childhood and growing up and histories and guilt and grief and whatever. What was the process like in terms of like structuring, like when to flashback, for how long to flashback, to what include now or what to save later, what mysteries to sort of reveal, what sadnesses to save or reveal? Like, what was the process like for that?
I can answer that. I mean, obviously I can answer it because I wrote it. So hopefully I can answer it. But to an extent, I can't answer it because I didn't have a good organized process. I had misery and suffering is what I had. So the way that the book came together, I don't know. I can't remember if it says this on the back of the book or anywhere, but it took me about 15 years to write.
Whoa. Wow.
Now, it would be wrong to say that in 1998, I opened up a Word document and started typing this book, and I labored, dedicated to my craft like Flaubert over the course of a decade and a half to create this. I wrote things. I would start a book. I would peter out. I would set it aside. I would start something different. I would write. I would peter out. I'd go back to the first thing, think this was good. I should finish this, and start writing it, and then give up. And this is the worst thing ever. Start a third thing. And I did that for years and years and years. And I never throw anything away. So I had just drafts of all of these books. And because I'm repetitive, a lot of them had similar characteristics. And some were sort of very straightforward, what you would call literary fiction. Some were sort of memoirish, Sebaldian reminiscences of childhood. Some of them, I wrote a science fiction novel at one point. There were all kinds of different things that I was working on, but a lot of them had similar sibling relationships. I recycled a lot of the same sort of anecdotes in different forms to try and make it all work. I had these pieces, and somewhere around mid to late 2012, I guess, I was so fed up with it, and I was so overwhelmed by all of the work that I'd put in and the nowhere that I'd gotten, that I essentially had an emotional breakdown, and thought, I don't want to write a book. I don't want to write a good book. I hate the entire idea of crafting a well-formed novel that is good. Who gives a shit? Fuck it. I hate it all. I hate everything. And I took everything that I'd ever written, because I kept it all, put it all in one Word document. It was like 400,000 words long. So it was like infinite jest length. And then I said, you know what? There are parts that I like, but they're not parts as in a chapter. They're parts as in a sentence. And I went through and I edited and I did the opposite of the advice. I killed everything that moved plot forward or did anything. I only kept the darlings, right? And did the opposite of sort of the generic writing advice, and just kept the sentences I liked. And that boiled down to whatever, 200 pages. And then I thought, and luckily, because I've been so repetitive over the years, I thought, well, this is just a book, and this all goes together. Like it's like suddenly, by cutting out all of the mechanics, it worked. And that sounds more drastic than it really was, but basically, by cutting out what would always happen is I would have some inspiration. I would write something that I really liked, but then I wouldn't have an idea of where to take it. And so then I spent a lot of time over the years sort of outlining, because I thought that would really help me finish something. And that was the greatest inhibitor to ever finishing anything for me, because I'm not that kind of writer. And all of the things that I wrote after outlining anything were always so mechanical, and they were rote, and they were just moving things forward, and they were boring. And that by cutting all of those parts out and only leaving the good, juicy, colorful pieces, which had been sort of written all out of the same emotional points, and which had been at one point on some kind of structure, all kind of hung together. And so then from that point, after I had that draft, and I said, this is literally kind of a novel now. This is what I've been going for against my own self. I was able to then just sort of comb through it and make and connect the places where it needed connection. It wasn't perfect. I mean, it wasn't perfect, obviously, or readable even, but it was then at that point easy to sort of connect the pieces together. And what I would do is print it out, take it to my office where I work over the weekend, go in the big conference room, and lay out all the different pieces. And in the book, there are sort of little sections of varying length in between the spaces. Those were all on separate pages. I'd print it out real small, because I didn't need to read it. I just needed to know what each one was. So they were all on separate pages. and then I would just lay them all out on the floor in the big conference room and stand up on a chair and look at it all at once. And then I could see, and I would move them around until they were in the order that I wanted them to be in. It was a lot closer to, I don't know if either of you play music or have ever done any music recording. Well, obviously with the podcast, maybe it's like that, where you can see the recording and you can say, okay, here's this, we need this, the tambourine to come in here. And then this is where everything kind of needs to drop out for a little bit. And then the rest of the band comes in here. And so it was more about orchestrating everything on that level. Because I knew I had all the pieces were good. It was just about pacing them in a way that kept some sort of momentum, because obviously it's not a action-packed book. So I wanted it to have, and even if it wasn't maybe obvious, and I think it's maybe not obvious, to have some sort of rhythm and pacing so that it moved forward. So that's how I did it.
So it sounds like a feature of, or a triumph of like the labor of editing, more so even than of writing, because when you like the writing portion of it, like maybe would have gone on for forever.
It's I enjoy editing far more than I enjoy writing.
That's interesting.
It's nice. Obviously, I like to get a lot out and have something to work with, but it's a lot easier for me once I have things. Now, that can also result in its own sort of wheel spinning, but in that instance, it worked out, because once I had everything and I could say, okay, I have point A, point B, point C, point D, point E, point F. I just have to connect the points so that it moves forward, and then I have to make sure that it's somewhat evenly structured so that there's not, one section doesn't go on too long. So it's I think the book has 7 sections, those sections that are separated by the images of the shells. Each one has sort of its own, not hard and fast, but its own sort of thing that it does. And it sort of moves back and forth between the present and the past, kind of to get to the end. And even though it seems extremely non-chronological, I think both the present and the past move generally forward in the book.
So you have about 320,000 words then that are just in a drawer somewhere. Is there anything like among that you're like, I wish I could have that back. I wish I included this part.
Well, no, I wouldn't have included any of the rest of it, and I do have it all because I've kept everything that I've ever written. Every now and then I do go back and look through to see if there's anything good that I could pull out for something else, because I would rather do that than have to actually write something. But no, there was a lot of that was just garbage. A lot of it was very not good. And there are times when especially in its sort of penultimate iteration, the idea that I had for the book that I ended up not writing was maybe somewhat okay, but not anything worth ever returning to.
Okay.
I think that kind of explains, like, when we were talking about the book, like, we really liked, like, there's this theme on the podcast that when a book has an ambiguous ending, I could kind of go either way, but he loves it.
Yeah.
And
I love denial of
he has like closure.
I love denial of all the parts clicking together. So what you were saying about like cutting out anything that really like makes it move or like traditionally feels like
it's like right in his wheelhouse.
Yeah, all that. That's the stuff that I love the most.
And so we talked about like the ending worked for both of us because it just is so cool. But I also like hearing the way that you wrote or edited this down. It's like, well, there's probably like a very genreified version of this story that like you maybe pulled something from the end where like it feels different, but also feels true to the thing. And like I can just kind of see like the different pieces of like different, like you saying that there's like a science fiction book somewhere, like that might, I just like the idea of pulling from different things and sort of montaging whatever. And it all kind of clicks into place more, understanding the process of actually creating the thing. There's not really a question in there, so I'm sorry about that.
No,
that's
it's
the
all
other
right.
thing I do. I just sort of talk a while, and I'm like, oh, I didn't land on a question.
And I do, obviously, I like stories, I like books, I like stories, and I like movies that are more open-ended or ambiguous. That, it, to me, is more. And it's not that I don't like an end, but I like to be left feeling a little wiggly afterwards. And I like and I like sort of being able to kind of just sort of, I don't know, it's just a good feeling. It's the feeling that I enjoy. I like. I don't know if either of you have ever seen the movie Cachet.
Oh, sure, Michael Haneke.
Yeah, I love that movie, and that has such a great end. No spoilers, I won't describe it, but it has a great end, and I loved it. And I loved when I was in the movie theater, I watched it. It was the middle of the day, and it was just me and I think maybe like an older couple. And the movie ended, and the lights came up, and the two old people looked at each other and said, "What the fuck?" And
that is the best feeling in the world.
And I thought, I'm with you guys, but I mean that positively. I like that feeling. Though obviously it's easy to have an open-ended end that doesn't do anything. And in fact, I don't think of that book as having an open or ambiguous end. I think that the elements of the book that are, I'm sorry, I'm trying to talk about it obliquely, both in case someone listening hasn't read it and doesn't want to know what happened.
We sort of treat these like we hope the people have read it before, but I mean, so you can spoil your own thing. We can.
Well, that's fine. I also probably don't remember it because I haven't read it in 10 years myself. But at the end, I think what's more important, what's less important to me is, well, what happened? What happened to Jacob? What happens to Leah? And more, what, the thing that happens, which actually happens at the beginning of the book, which is sort of like her emotional. Is she going to? The issue is about her emotional reaction. Like, how is she going to live, as opposed to what happened? Because I think, I mean, practically, like, I don't think that there's really like much ambiguity as to what would happen if this was a real life thing. But anyway.
Well, you bring up the Haneke movie. We normally ask a question toward the end of the interview, but I want to ask it now. Like, Bob makes these seasons of the podcast, around a certain theme. So like, this is all about Kentucky, but like the next one we're doing is all about like ecology and like the environment and all that sort of stuff. And we've done like campus novels and the internet and whatever. So when we talk to authors, what we like to ask is, if people really liked this book, whether the setting or the feeling or the mood or the structure or whatever, what would you recommend? You can also do films again. Like, that's what sort of inspired me to ask now. What would you have people go read or watch or do or whatever to sort of expand? Like, if you're building your own mini module of media around this book, like, what would you recommend people go check out?
And what kind of stuff, what other books do you think this book is in conversation with?
I'll answer that, but I'm going to answer it honestly, but I have to give a disclaimer first, which is that as a person, I am, and I think this is just maybe because of my age, because I'm 48 and I'm a Gen Xer, I am so constitutionally disinclined to ever do or say anything that feels to me at all complimentary of anything that I've done. That to say, well, if you liked this book, how have you read the Bible? It's just, it feels. I'll answer that question. But
do you know that like on the $2 radio site, they do a thing where it's like at the bottom, it's like, if you enjoy Harmony Korine and David Lynch, you may like this novel. Like, it directly does that.
They didn't. I would be incapable of doing that without making a joke and self-deprecating.
Well,
But
so
for
you
you,
don't have to. You can. This can be like the things that influenced you, the things that really like ring your bell in some way.
I'm going to answer you honestly. I'm not going to say, well, have you seen Ernest Goes to Camp or Ernest Scared Straight?
I mean,
I'm
look,
going,
no one has recommended Ernest yet, and like I would love to have Ernest be a part of this recommendation.
well, all right. So Ernest is part of the recommendation. I'll be honest with you.
Hell yeah.
I'll be honest with you. Ernest is part. I always recommend Ernest, but I think if I was to say, oh, what other books would go well with this, or what are the books that, if I was putting together a syllabus, and if someone was putting together a syllabus and they said, here's the syllabus, your book is on it, what other books would I be flattered and think accurately flatter me? I would say
That's it's a much smarter way to ask the question than what I said.
well, no, I'm trying to frame it so that I don't feel like I'm being self-aggrandizing. But to me, the line of stories and books that come from first around Henry James's ghost stories like Turn of the Screw into M.R. James ghost stories and Robert Aikman's stories and Elizabeth Bowen's ghost stories up to Shirley Jackson and The Haunting of Hill House. And so that sort of micro genre of English ghost story. I know Shirley Jackson's not English, but that's that type of tale that is creepy, which I love. I just love it. But also, there is the very open ended, right? I mean, we don't often think of horror as a genre being delicate, right?
Right.
But those are the kinds of stories. Ramsey Campbell stories are another good example. I love them. Or Seaton's Aunt is another great novella that just these ambiguous, open-ended tales that I love, and so that's where I think more than anything else. I mean, I don't think anyone has ever referred to me as a horror writer or a genre novelist, but that's, I think of, and I mean, horror, of course, is its own, as a genre, has its own problem because I don't think there's a really good title name for it that actually encompasses everything that what we think of as horror, whether it's fiction or movies, do, because there's such a wide range of tone and effect. But that sort of vibe is where I think that I'm come out of, and or at least what I'm trying to do. That's those are like the seniors in high school that I really want to be like, and I'm a little nervous to talk to them. But I've started to dress like them and look a little silly.
Well, can I tell you and you can self-deprecatingly wilt away from this compliment however you like. But how I described the book was a feeling of true crime in the way that I remembered America's Most Wanted and those kidnapping stories from when I was a child, sort of wearing a Virginia Woolf jacket, sort of dealing with the water-like tendencies of memory to slip by and change and how our brain bounces back and forth. It reminded me of like her use of language. So you got the Virginia Woolf comp from me. So that
Thank
feels.
you. I mean, it's extremely flattering. I can barely stand it, but and that's I think especially going to the sort of like Unsolved Mysteries, 80s VHS ness of it. I mean, we talked about the ghost story creepiness part of it, but I think equally important to the tone of the book that I intentionally wanted to touch on was also the extremely tedious and boring nature of certain parts of life, which I know is tough and risky. I remember when I was in college, when one of my creative writing classes, someone else had written something And the teacher asked them what feeling they were trying to get across, and they said boredom. And the teacher said, "Why would you want to do that?" Which, of course, so yeah, I recognize that it's risky to say, I want to write about boredom. But, one of the things, knowing that I was writing a very sort of like Kentucky specific book, right? Kentucky's in the name of it. It was very much a tribute to my hometown, but I also wanted to intentionally, I think if someone said, just to an average person, maybe, what would you think of when you think of Kentucky fiction? And I think they might be inclined to think of very sort of like Eastern Kentucky, mountain holler specific, like, oh, this is going to be a story of multiple generations of like families in coal mining country who like have, and that was of course not my childhood. My childhood was just small college town in central Kentucky, which we didn't have a coal mine or forests or raccoons or anything.
You just had an ocean, apparently.
Well, but I used to find seashells all the time on the stream that went through our neighborhood. And I asked my mom, I said, why am I finding a seashell? And she said, because Kentucky used to be underwater, and those are just ancient shells from when it was an ocean. So that was,
Cool.
But to go back to the, watching something when I was a kid in the 80s, watching something like Unsolved Mysteries was again kind of this doorway into like, there is something else going on wild out there that, it's not here. And not in a good way. Obviously, those are dreadful things, but it added just that kind of like, you would watch Unsolved Mysteries in the evening and then go up to your room and kind of be a little unnerved. And that was its own, I don't know. It was nice. It's dreadful to say it's nice when you have watched something that's about bad things happening to people, and it's not nice, but it gave you a sense of a larger world that being a little kid in a small town didn't usually give you. I think Ray Bradbury too is another good example. I mean, Something Wicked This Way Comes was a book and a movie both that I loved growing up, and was very sort of kids in a small town, and there might be something else more interesting out there if you're just lucky enough to see it. And when I was old enough to get into Stephen King too, the early Stephen King stuff that was obviously deeply indebted to Ray Bradbury, that was always about kids finding something scary in a town.
And
really
like
resonated with me.
With Stephen King, it's always like, yeah, there's a monster, but also like, boy, those older kids are a lot scarier than that monster is.
Yeah.
So yeah, the real life stuff is always just as freaky.
Oh yeah, we didn't talk about it in the episode, but there's something that's very real about Leah just being like, I want to be around the kids who know how to curse. Like, they're just like, I want to be the kids who like, they're not like really worldly, but like they know the bad language. It's like they're the cool kids. Like, they're not even cool, but just like there's something goal worthy about being like, oh, one day I'll know the bad words too.
I remember when I was a kid, any kid could tell me the dumbest thing in the world and I would believe it. And I remember anybody who told me some like, oh, well, that if you look in this door in this one house that you'll see whatever like scary thing, or anything like that, I would believe. I was that kid, both because I was gullible and naive, but also like I really wanted to believe literally anything. Like, I will take it. Like, I will not be credulous, and I'm still kind of that way. Like, I'm not the skeptical. I'm more than happy to believe anything. I don't know if you saw, it was last week or week before, there was the article that the person talked about how they had been scammed out of $50,000, and lots of people were like, "Oh, I can't believe you fell for that." And it's like, I would fall for in a minute. I've been scammed before easily. I don't even try. Even I recognize like, this is a scam. I'm going to fall for this. Let's see what happens.
I remember like when I was a little kid, like I would walk around my house, like knocking on walls, being like, maybe there's like a secret compartment, like knowing on the other side of the wall, like there's no room for there to be. But like, I'm like, there might be something, like just wanting that, like more, like not even like special, but just like more than what you have, like that you could be, like there could be a story told about you or whatever.
Yeah. It's
Yeah, you got to
intoxicating.
hold on to I mean, as you get older, as I get older, it seems like you've held on to that magic a little bit. But as I get older and get more cynical and skeptical and things, it's hard to recreate the like visceral emotions of response that you have to ghost stories from when you're a kid. There's a real shame to that desensitization, because like it's very, very difficult to get those the ability to feel those emotions back once they've sort of left you through cynicism and pessimism and things of that nature.
There was a wonderful time when early in the internet's life when you could periodically stumble across like a really good thread on some job specific message board, like, long haul trucker message board has a Halloween thread, and read a couple good stories. And I don't believe anything, but when I'm reading something, I'm more than happy. Hey, I'm not gonna doubt this. Why wouldn't I just enjoy it, right? I mean,
Mm-hmm.
I I'm my belief. I suspend my disbelief constantly. I'm
I am
ready.
always getting yelled at in text message threads because I'll share something and people just be like, that's not real. What do you like? Why are you sharing this piece of news that is clearly fake?
So actually, on this topic, I don't believe that there's a Wikipedia page for you, but one thing that, because this is a thing of record,
Source.
we are a source, we can be quoted, we can be sourced. Is there something about yourself that you would like the world to think about you that may or may not be true, but that they could be like, look, he said on this podcast episode XYZ,
Yeah, we can
it
edit,
must be true.
we can edit your potential Wikipedia page to include a lie if you'd like.
It could be anything. It could be small. Like some people, like, I wish I was 2 inches taller. I wish I had a different color hair. Some people have really shot for the moon.
No, in fact, I'm very thrilled I don't have a Wikipedia page. I don't want anyone to think anything about me or know anything about me. Um, I if there was one thing I could do differently, in retrospect, with respect to the book, I would have published it under a pseudonym. I would
Mm.
I would love for no I haven't had any problem. It's not like anyone read it and thought, how could you write
Yeah.
this book? But I there's I I would just love to have done it and no one know.
And then,
Um,
because now you got people like me just like sliding in your DMs, like, hey, we read your book. You want to talk to
no,
us about it?
well, and I'm fine. I'm fine with that, because it's not like it happens a lot. But there is there. I can't even fill out the bio on a social media page because I can't think of what to put there that is what would I want someone to know? What would I write there that doesn't seem silly?
Well, it sounds like you got to
So
write 400,000 words and then cut out 399,980 of them.
it would just be 20 sort of purple. It would just be the most purple bio, and then everyone could leave a 2-star review of my bio and say, this was really let me down at the end. The bio did not deliver on its promise.
All right. So we will not create a Wikipedia page for you nor lie for you on the Wikipedia page.
Although I will say I do actually admire a good hoax and lie. Like I don't mind that. I mean, don't go to prison for fraud, but um, I do have to respect the myth making.
Sure. Yeah.
I guess the only other question I have, and you can also just refuse to answer this, but like if you were in Leah's shoes, because I think we both talked about this in the episode. If you were in Leah's shoes and someone came up to you and just said, "I am your brother," you assumed was dead or missing or gone, would you want to believe them? Not would you believe them, would you want to believe them? Like if you were in her position, would you want that possibility, or would you just be like, "I've already grieved"?
So you've asked an extremely good and extremely difficult question, and um, I don't know that I've ever thought about that. Um, I think that my feeling is that she had not to that point addressed how she felt about her brother sufficiently, perhaps,
Mm.
and that as much as we like to talk about nostalgia and sort of dreamy memories of the past, they are a narcotic. They are, it's not necessarily the sort of drifting back to the past isn't dealing with anything. It is creating a mental palace in which to exist to keep a part of the past alive that keeps you from changing or moving forward or living in the present, perhaps. And again, I'm just not having cracked the book open in a decade. I'm just sort of free associating and certainly would not um, put my opinion above anyone else's when it comes to the book. But my feeling is that I think it can be an impediment to life to spend too much time thinking about the past, right?
Mm.
And that maybe that uncanny event of having someone approach her is the thing that jars her loose from that and forces her to synthesize the past and the present and then have to address how is she going to live going forward. And I think I would never, it's too late for me to change anything in the book, and I never would revise it and change it, because I think once you've done a book, you've done a book, and you shouldn't go back and change them, even if you think you could do it better. But I think that if I were to change anything or were to do things, I might spend more time with that part of the book than I did, um, because I think that that's what's happening there. And so the question of like which would I prefer? I don't know what I would prefer. I mean, I think it would be profoundly upsetting, and I think it would be strange, and especially under the circumstances that it happens in the book don't seem normal. Um, but I think it's honestly like it would be such a huge life altering event. It's almost impossible to know. I mean, of course you would want it to be true, right?
Mm-hmm.
You would want it to be true, but then there would be so many, especially in the way that it happens in the book. You want it to be true, but then it's like, well, if this is true, why is it happening like this? Because this seems like a little weird.
Right.
And if it is true, then what? I don't know. I think it would be. I think it would be an emotionally complicated situation that probably deserves its own 400-page long novel to fully explore.
Love it.
That was a
Yeah, that
dreadful
is
answer.
I love that as an answer.
Well, I tried.
The last question, and we play a little bit of fast and loose here with copyright, but we have 2 episodes. We have one about the book, and then we have this interview. Do you have any preference, any choice going to be thematically tied to the book, or just songs you like for outro music? Songs to end the episode after we say, thank you, goodbye. Just hard cut to a music cue of your choice.
Oh, that's a great question. And I wish I'd thought of that so that I could have a really good answer. So let's see. What would be good? I mean, I will tell you that probably the music that I listened to the most while I was during the last, I guess, from 2007 to when I finished it in 2013. So the last 6 years of the book I wrote while sitting in a mall. And that's where I would do most of my writing. My wife and I had moved to Virginia, and I would go to the mall. I had studied for the bar exam in the mall, and I found it very successful. I mean, dying malls are fantastic for getting work done. And I would sit in the Books A Million, the Joe Mugs and the Books A Million in the mall all day long on Saturdays and Sundays and in the many evenings. And I would listen to Sun. And I don't know if you're familiar with the band Sun.
It's like doom kind of
drone metal.
Okay.
No drums, just long chords. And
you're blowing my mind. That's not what I was expecting.
That's what I listened to. It's
Is there a particular album or song that really resonates with you from them?
Um, I listened to the album. Well, I listened to all of their works that had been released up to that point, sort of on um, in just constantly. But the album Monoliths and Dimensions is the one I probably listened to the most. Um, uh, and their first album, Double Not Void, it's just a wall of noise, and it's great, and I love it. And um, I would sit there and type and listen to that, and periodically turn it down enough so that I could hear other people having conversations. And people will sit in a Joe Muggs in a semi-dead mall and talk about their business within earshot of anyone. And if you've got your computer open, you can just sort of learn about life. And yeah, I would eavesdrop and listen to drone metal.
Did you listen to when you were in your conference in your boardroom with papers all over the floor? You standing on the table looking down at your work. Were you listening to things then, or was that in silence? You're like, I need to focus. I need to concentrate.
I probably wasn't listening into anything because there probably wasn't any way for me to listen to anything because I didn't have an iPhone that played music until fairly recently. In our conference room, I don't think had any way to play music in it, so it was probably pretty silent. But I mean, Sun's great because it you can work to it because it obliterates anything else that your mind might be doing at any given time. It makes it very easy to concentrate while listening to it.
Very cool.
So,
well, thank you so much. This was a delight. I'm glad we get to talk to you. Thank you for the book. I will say, in case you listen to our episode, I will tell you now too that the middle part, like the sort of the Don DeLillo-ian list of like grief that everybody's going through that same night, like at the same time throughout the town, is like one of my favorite things that I've read in a very long time. So,
well, thank you.
Not to continue to blow smoke up your ass, but I genuinely like that part. Like I really like the whole book, but like that part in particular, I was just like, this is the good stuff.
It's wonderful.
Well, thank you. That's my favorite part of the book as well, and I appreciate it. And it came this year marks the 10th anniversary of when it came out.
Whoa.
And I've been working on the second one since then, and it's really nice. I can't thank you enough. It's nice to periodically be reminded that the work that I'm doing is not just me in a room by myself, that there are every now and then people out there who enjoy it. So it really means more to me than I can properly express. I really appreciate the time that you all have spent with it. Even if you didn't like it, I appreciate it. Thank you.
All right. Well, if you're ever in suburban New Jersey, hit us up. We'll buy you a drink.
Well, you got to take me so I can see some Jersey Devils. I mean, I'm not going to come up there unless I get to see a cryptid.
You would, yeah. You'd love the Pine Barrens. It would fit right in.
That would be that. That sounds like the good part.
Cool. Well, thank you, David.
Thank you. Talk to you all later.
Heck, burn time don't mean nothing to a pig. Know what I mean?